Alright, so this is just gonna be a little, bug and, kind of balance feedback video for Badware. Because I want to talk about some things that I've noticed about the character, since I've been playing them a lot since the update dropped. But yeah, so, for starters, I want to talk about Rift. This is a very small visual bug, but it is something that does kind of matter. And you can see right here, the Rift cooldown goes into just the bottom of your screen. And this has been a bug ever since the Rift canceling was added. So like this. And you can see when you cancel Rift, normally the cooldown actually doesn't go to the bottom of your screen like that. So that's just a bug that exists with when you use Rift normally now, so it's just a little visual bug. Not anything crazy or super important, but it is something I figured to mention. Another thing with Rift is in relation to teleporting to a computer that is about to be destroyed. I failed there, but when you try and teleport to a computer that is about to be destroyed, sometimes it can happen where you teleport to that computer and it just explodes and you don't teleport anywhere and Rift is put on the full cooldown. And that's kind of annoying sometimes. So, I mean, I think the solution to this is pretty simple. I think if you just make it so that when you click on a computer, it adds some percentage to it before it goes away. Didn't work that time either, but it can happen. But I think if you click on a computer with Rift, it adding a small amount of percentage to the computer just to make it live for that extra moment would be a good way to go about making, computers actually live before they explode and you don't teleport anywhere. Another thing in relation to Rift is that the Rift cancel, when you cancel it, puts it on a full cooldown. Puts on the full cooldown of 20 seconds. And if you look in the info tab for Badware, it says that canceling Rift is supposed to put it on a halved cooldown of just 10 seconds. But it doesn't do that. Canceling Rift just puts it on the full cooldown. And it's not too much of a big deal, to be honest, in terms of gameplay, but it's just a quality of life thing that I'd like to see, honestly, is for Rift to actually be put on a halved cooldown when you cancel it. Additionally, I think that you can't really see it right now because I have the hastened buff. But I do think that the cooldown for, see when you start the Rift, the cancel cooldown is 2 seconds. It's not that big of a deal right now since I have the hasten buff, but I actually do think that 2 seconds is a little bit of time to wait to cancel it. It's really not that big of a deal, to be honest, but it is just quality of life, like I said earlier. I would like if this cooldown of 2 seconds for canceling was reduced a little bit, just for ease of use, to be honest. I don't think that would make any toxic gameplay or anything, so that's just an idea there. I think that's all I have to talk about when it comes to Rift. I think so. But you can see with a move like Bolt, see how fast that cancel comes in? That is really fast, which allows you to cancel it really quickly. And I kind of would like to see a similar thing with Rift, though. I don't know if that could, like I said, lead to any toxic gameplay or anything of the sort. I doubt it, but it's just a consideration. So the only bug that I know right now with Firewall Bypass, I think, is in relation to its placement limit thing. So before, when you had 4 PCs, you couldn't place down a new one. you had to rift to when to destroy it. But now, as of recent, they made it so that you can place down a new PC when you're at 4 and it'll just destroy the oldest one, right? Which is good. It's a good feature, and it helps Badware deal with a lot of loops that they couldn't deal with, like an LMS if someone just goes to a loop that their computers don't cover. But there is one thing relating to this, and it's that when you're at max computers and you're in range of a computer, so you can't place another computer down, if you try and press the key to destroy it or place a new computer, which would normally just not let you place a PC, it just detonates the oldest one automatically, and yeah. Since it does do that, there can be scenarios where you accidentally like blow up just one of your PCs for no reason and kind of lose some map pressure, which is kind of sad. This doesn't come up very often at all, but it is just something to consider. That I think if you're next to a PC and you have all max PCs and stuff, and you try and, press Q, it shouldn't destroy the oldest computer until you're out of the range of where you can't place a PC. I think that's all the important bugs with Badware right now. Or the bugs that I've run into in playing the character, so the important ones. So now I want to talk about some balance stuff. So balance-wise, I think Badware is actually in a somewhat decent state, but I do think that they are a little weaker compared to some of the other killers right now. And I think a big part of why that is because of their just lack of actual crowd control. Crowd control is a pretty important thing in Dive Death now, and because there's just a lot more abilities that encourage people to group up more. Like you have Bugle, you have Noisemaker and stuff, and just in general, there's a lot more team abilities that can help your team, so you're encouraged to be around your team much more often. Now, most killers do have ways to deal with this, to deal with crowds and stuff. Like, Pursuer has Chomp in stock, which can deal pretty big damage to crowds if you line it up. And even if you don't line it up to hit multiple people, it's still discouraging players from being next to each other. And same thing with Howl and stuff. Since it can hit multiple people, it's discouraging players from staying in this grouped up area because you can all be affected by it and stuff. Then there's Artful does actually struggle with crowds a bit, but Artful does have walls and music boxes to sort of split up crowds more often, which allows him to single out targets, which is kind of his game plan. Killjoy, pretty obvious, basically the crowd control killer. You don't have to worry about that at all on Killjoy. And Harkin's also pretty obvious. You have Repress and Agitation in Calm mode, which are both pretty good against crowds, and in Rage you have Light Piercer, which is especially good against crowds. So, and then there's Badware, who, what do you have? You have a Rift. So you rift your computer, creates the explosion around it, which does 10 bleed damage to everyone hit by it, which is it's okay. I've had a couple times where this bleed mattered, but it's really not that big of an effect. And since it is bleed, it's kind of a bad thing for it. My idea for just a way to buff this damage for Bolt, or not Bolt, sorry, Rift, is to make it so that the damage, which is 10 bleed currently, is 10 flat damage instead. So when you teleport to a PC on someone, instead of getting the bleed debuff and taking 10 damage, they just take 10 damage immediately from the explosion. Now, you could argue in some areas that this would be a nerf. So you have like damage resistance effects like Noisemaker, Punch Windup, I guess. Like that would be affected by the damage resistance, because I don't think bleed is affected by that. But in most scenarios, this would just be a buff, because it means that if a target is on low health and they run to a computer, like really low health, you can teleport to it. Instead of just getting ragdolled and getting the bleed effect for a moment and potentially escaping, they just die from the 10 damage, from 10 flat damage. Additionally, if, let's say there's like a civilian who's at like 30 HP or something, when you teleport to them right now, they'll take a little bit of bleed ticks, and then they'll take 1 M1 from you if you manage to combo that. They won't die from that though, because the bleed hasn't ticked all the way yet. So, with flat damage instead, when you teleport on someone, they'll take the 10 damage immediately, and then if you can combo it with your M1, they take 30 damage, and they die. It's a pretty simple buff, and in some areas it wouldn't be too crazy or anything. But it's just a nice quality of life, I think, for Badware, to make it a little bit easier to secure kills with Rift sometimes, and make the damage more threatening. You can also go further with Rift, and I think that it would be nice to give it a little bit more crowd control potential. An idea I had was that depending on the amount of civilians hit by the explosion, you would get additional bleed damage. So let's say, you hit 1 civilian, you get 10 flat damage, right? With my idea. But if you hit multiple civilians, like say you hit 3 civilians or something, then you would get additional bleed damage. So for every additional target hit, you'd get X amount of additional bleed damage. So if I hit 2 people, they both take 10 flat, and then they also take, like, let's say like 3 to 5 additional bleed damage or something. And then if there's more targets in that range, then they would take more bleed damage. Each person would take more bleed damage, plus the flat damage. This could, depending on the numbers you use for it, it could potentially have very high highs of like doing like like 25 plus damage in total, which it could be much. I don't know if it would be too crazy or anything, but it isn't a situation that pops up very often anyway, so I think being rewarded for it is kind of fair. But even then, it could be a number like 3 bleed or something for every additional target hit. Like 3 bleed damage or something. It's just an idea. That is like one way to make it so that Rift has additional crowd control. Additionally, you can make it so that instead of just additional bleed damage, instead, depending on the amount of targets you hit, you would get more percentage added to your PCs. So right now, when you teleport to a PC, you only get a flat 20% percentage added to all your PCs on the map. But if you made it so that could scale a little bit, so like let's say every additional civilian in radius of the Rift explosion adds an additional like 5% or something to your PCs. So instead of just 20%, if I hit like 3 civilians with the explosion, I would get 30% added to my PC, all my PCs. Yeah. Pretty simple idea, but I do think that they could go both of the ideas of like additional bleed damage or additional percentage could go a long way to discourage players from like grouping up and stuff against Badware and making it so that they actually have some options in crowd control. An additional idea I had was in relation to Bolt. So, I mean, right now Bolt is Badware's main damaging move, but it's very countered by grouping up. If you have caretakers or hot dog civilians or block civilians and stuff, those people can just kind of like run in the way of your Bolt and face tank it. You do have a decent control over it, but it's still pretty easy to do, to just run in front of the Bolt and tank it. Now, I'm not saying this shouldn't exist, but I do think that it would be nice for Bolt to have some sort of like interaction that makes it a little bit more risky to do that sometimes. And my idea for that is just in relation to the Bolt's throw variant. So I'm going to spawn some dummies. Objects. Dummy. Boop. Boop. So when you do the bolt, when you're bolting in range of a PC, you get the grab variant for Bolt, which will make it do some additional damage and throw the target. You can throw it into PC, and you can throw it into a corner to zone them. But when you throw a civilian into another civilian right now, you can see all that happens is they get knocked back a little bit and ragdolled as well. My idea is that just if there is civilians that are hit by the throw, so if I dash into someone and then I throw them at it, didn't work there, but and then I throw them into another civilian, that civilian which was hit by the other thrown civilian would take some damage instead of just being ragdolled and flung, which is just basically nothing. Let me kill these guys. Now, would that buff be anything crazy? Not really. Like, it would still be pretty situational. First of all, it would have to be the grab variant of Bolt. And there would have to be another civilian nearby. And you still have other options when you grab someone with the Bolt variant. Like, you can throw them into a corner to zone them, or throw them into a PC to add percentage and stuff, and more damage. Like, you have options there. So having the option to just throw into a crowd of civilians, having that be there would just be a nice little thing. Could do like 10 damage or something to the civilians hit, or 15 or something if you wanted to make the damage more significant. I feel like 10 damage would be low enough to the point where it might not even matter. So maybe 15 or something, I don't know. But that's just an idea to give Bolts at least a little bit of crowd control, even if it's not much. I'm not sure about this, but I also think the base speed of Bolt could be increased a little bit, especially with how short the Bolt duration is now after all the balance changes that it's went through, or at least the base Bolt duration anyway, if you don't get any PC boosts or anything, you know? Like, this duration is pretty short. So I think increasing the speed of this, like, just maybe slightly would be fair, but I don't know. But the only reason I say that is because with how slow, I mean, it's kind of fast, but with how the speed of Bolt is now when it's outside of PC range, it's really easy to just jump in front of it. But that's just my idea. It's that part doesn't have to be added necessarily, but it is just another idea to maybe help Bolt against face tanking and stuff. So those are my balance ideas to give Badware a little bit of help in the crowd control department. And I don't think this would make Badware broken or anything. I think it would just give them options, which I think is what killers need right now. Killers need options against crowd control, and most of the killers do have that. I just think Badware is the one that's lacking the most in it, which is why they end up being kind of sad into big groups of hot dog and bugles and whatnot who just tank your bolt and stuff. So, yeah, that's it.